in all the millions of acres of wilderness that's there, this car drives right up and parks within 5 metres of their camp. If we pack up now and leave, he might consider that insulting. He might be crazy. He had these sort of heads that looked like human heads. And then he shot them with a high-powered hunting rifle. I'm Andrew Rule, this is Life and Crimes. We've got a little bonus episode today. It's not long, but it's rather juicy. We've just got a little postscript to the Wonnangatta story, the story of Greg Lynn, the Jetstar pilot, who murdered one person and was present when the other one died, according to a jury. Recently, I spoke to a man from East Gippsland. I think he lives in the Bairnsdale area, but he grew up in the town of Hayfield. And Hayfield was, back in the day, a timber town full of timber mills, timber log contractors, trucks who carted logs down to the mills, all that sort of stuff. And this man grew up there and he knew a lot of people in the industry, including the late Russell Hill, who of course was one of the couple who were killed in the Wonnangatta Valley back in 2020. And this man, whose name I know, but I'm going to change it for various reasons. I think his relatives and friends would prefer that. We're going to call him Cam, as in Campbell. And Cam tells me that when he saw photographs in the newspapers and on television of the Jetstar pilot Greg Lynn when he was facing court over the Wonnangatta murder or murders, he was shocked and stunned because he recognised that man. And the story he tells me in great detail, which I'm about to tell you listeners, is that he'd met that man in a very unusual situation back in 1997. In fact, he named, I think he said it was September 97, certainly late 97. And our friend Cam, the local boy, he was up there with his then young wife and little kids. He had, I think, a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old or similar. And Cam and his family were camping in the Wellington River catchment. They were in a borrowed Chesney camper van, which he'd borrowed from his in-laws, and it was late September 1997. Now, they got to this particular bend in the Wellington River. It's just downstream south of the junction with the Breakfast Creek. He was able to show me on a map. They set up camp in the early afternoon, with no one else around. It was, a million wild acres, and there they were, and the weather was good, and they were happy, and they had their camper van, and they had all the food and all the good stuff you have when you go camping with kids. And they set up a nice camp, and they lit a little fire, and they pulled the tent thing out of the side of the van or whatever it was. And there they were, very happy, until late in the afternoon they heard a motor, and up drove a cream-coloured vehicle, cream or buff-coloured vehicle. And my impression that it was a four-wheel drive, but anyway, this car, in all the millions of acres of wilderness that's there, this car drives right up and parks within 5 metres of their camp. And they are thinking, well, this is not great. We don't need to have somebody so close to us. But then again, what are we going to say? Because the guy that gets out of the car is wearing full army camouflage gear. He's got camo gear. He's got the black commando boots, high lace-up boots that go about, 15 centimetres up his shins. Full-on commando gear, full camouflage. And they think, who dresses like that to go camping? It's, sort of crazy stuff. It's semi-military. And then they sort of trying to be pleasant, and they nod to him. And he says, oh, you don't mind if I camp here? And he wasn't really asking their permission. He was more or less stating that he would be camping there. And they just sort of nodded and half smiled and put up with it. Well, soon enough, they very much regretted this fellow turning up because he pulls out what they call mannequin heads. He had these sort of heads that looked like human heads, but they were mannequins made of polystyrene or whatever. And he set them up around the place on rocks and stumps and stuff. And then he shot them with a high-powered hunting rifle. He shot them with, the big, heavy caliber rifle that you would shoot deer or pigs with. And this really got the family's attention because they thought, this is deeply weird and deeply disturbing that he's doing this right at the camp near us and he's shooting what looked like human heads. It was very intimidating and quite strange, quite eerie. And they were thinking, we wish we weren't here, this man and wife and little kids. We wish we weren't here, but if we pack up now and leave, he might consider that insulting, he might be crazy, he might do something bad. So they thought, we'll just sit it out. So they pretend everything's all right and they go to bed early in their camper van. And the man who's telling me the story, Cam, he said his wife was quite anxious, but they were keen not to make the kids frightened. And so they all piled in their camper van. And what he did, he got out his own shotgun. He had a pump-action shotgun because this guy's a bit of a shooter himself, but he had the shotgun with him. And he put a towel over it so the kids wouldn't sort of see it. And he put it between him and the door of the caravan, and then he locked the door. And he thought, if this mad guy in the camouflage gear causes any trouble tonight and tries to get into our caravan, I'm going to let him have it with the shotgun because, they were quite intimidated. So he does that. They sleep there. They didn't get much sleep, but they slept there, and in the morning they packed up and left and were quite happy to be able to do so. There'd not been any ugly scenes, and it was something that they talked about on and off at different times over the years. That strange time when we camped up there and we saw that man in the full camouflage gear shooting the mannequin heads, etc. How scary it was. And that's all right, and they sort of forget it. And in fact, Cam and his wife, years and years later, split up at some point, which doesn't matter. It's not relevant, really. And when the Wonnangatta murder happens, murder singular plus one death, Carol Clay and Russell Hill, when that happens and when Greg Lynn's photographs are shown on television and in the newspapers, Cam recognises him and says, that's that guy. That's the guy that was shooting up at Wellington River in 1997. And then it came back to him, the brief conversation they'd had, a very brief conversation they'd had back in 1997 where Cam was trying to be sort of friendly and he said to the guy, oh, right, and, how are you? Have you come far? And what do you do? And the man told him that his name was Greg and that he worked in aviation. He didn't say, I'm a pilot. He said, my name's Greg and I work in aviation. I work in the aviation industry, I think was the way he put it. And, of course, that dovetailed precisely with Greg Lynn, who was a pilot. And so there seems little doubt to our old mate Cam up at Bairnsdale, formerly of Hayfield, that he and his wife and kids camped next to Greg Lynn in 1997 at a time when he was clearly very keen on shooting at things that looked like humans with high-powered rifles and acting in a very strange and intimidating way. One of the things they noticed about him was that as he was shooting the mannequins with his rifle, he would talk to himself. He talked to himself, which of course is one of the things that the police noticed about Greg Lynn 25 years later when they were investigating Greg Lynn, and they had listening devices in his car, listening devices in his house, listening devices, up the wazoo. They had them everywhere. The major thing they noticed about him was that he talked to himself. And apparently it's a bit of a pilot habit. Pilots do it because in the air they spend hundreds of hours flying and they're obliged to describe what they're doing. So it goes on the black box recorder equipment. So they say, I'm turning, 3 degrees to the north or whatever it might be. Usually fairly technical, navigational stuff. And the habit seems to spill over with some of them into everyday life. And so Greg Lynn, when he was driving his car, would say, now I'm turning left into Springvale Road, now I'm turning right into Smith Street. And it was for that reason that the police easily understood where he was going at all times, because he would describe exactly what he was doing. And it was for that reason, apart from the fact they probably had some navigational bug in his car as well, that the year after the murders, they knew he was heading up to Gippsland and realised that they would have to act fast and arrest him, because if he was driving back up into the bush, they didn't know whether he was going to kill himself or maybe kill somebody else. And so the police had to make a decision. Do we let this guy run or do we grab him? And really the only responsible answer was, we have to grab him. And so they called in the SOG, and the SOG called in the helicopters, and they landed up the bush on a helipad used by firefighters, and they were able to sneak in and grab the heavily armed murderer, as it turns out, the man who was convicted of murder. And that is just a postscript, strange and eerie postscript to the story of Greg Lynn, the Wonnangatta killer. Thanks for listening. Life and Crimes is a Sunday Herald Sun production for True Crime Australia. Our producer is Jonty Burton. For my columns, features and more, go to heraldsun.com.au/Andrew Rule, one word. For advertising inquiries, go to newspodcastssold@news.com.au. That is all one word, newspodcastssold. And if you want further information about this episode, links are in the description.
Hi, it's Gary Jubilant here. Do you want a real and raw look inside the world of crime? Well then check out my podcast, I Catch Killers, where I interview people from all sides of the law.
I draw my firearm and I went into fight mode. I wanted to find and confront this gunman.
I'm not getting verbaled, am I?
I shouldn't have trusted you. See, I'm trying to open my mind up to defence bars.
I know, it's just begging to be said.
Yeah, fair call. We have amazing guests every week. Search for I Catch Killers wherever you get your podcasts.